All right, welcome everyone. Wow, there are so many people here today. This is really, really wonderful. Welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you today to the start of the 2021 Interreach Webinar Series. So my name is Kristine Glauber and I serve as the Interreach Webinar Chair. We obviously have quite a few new folks on the call today, so I'd like to take a moment to welcome our newcomers. And for those that are returning, thank you for your continued interest and support. So today's event represents a new model for how our webinar series operates. Since 2017, for those of you who haven't been with us since the beginning, our community of practice has met on a monthly basis with individual and panel presentations on various topics related to our group's mission, which is to develop our profession and provide professional development. So last year, in response to an exploratory survey, Dr. Bethany Laursen and Kristine and I began discussions for a series of topical webinars suggested by Bethany. And this series on tools that interdisciplinary integration researchers and practitioners can use in boundary spanning research teams is the fruit of those discussions. It's been a pleasure working with Bethany on this project, and we're so thankful for her thought leadership and willingness to try out this new model for our community. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Bethany. Dr. Bethany K. Laursen is an Integration and Implementation Studies, or I2S specialist, who focuses on frameworks, methods, and tools that aid cross-disciplinary integration. After working as a cross-disciplinary environmental scholar and educator for 10 years, she switched fields to study and facilitate cross-disciplinarity itself. Bethany now channels most of her expertise through her own firm, Laursen Evaluation and Design, LLC, and past clients have included Conservation International, the Michigan Fitness Foundation, and the Nelson Institute for Environmental Studies. Her I2S work also dovetails with her role as Assistant Dean for Michigan State University's Graduate School. Bethany is a research member of the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative, a research and evaluation partner with the National Socio-Environmental Synthesis Center, or SOSINC, and a founding member of the Global Alliance for Inter and Transdisciplinary Research and Education, also known as the ITD Alliance, working group on toolkits and methods. She holds a PhD in community sustainability and an MA in philosophy from Michigan State, as well as a joint MS in environment and resources and forestry from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Bethany's bachelor's is in biological sciences and a minor in chemistry, and I also have it on good authority that she loves cats and canoes. So thank you so much for being here today, Bethany. Thank you to everyone who is on the call. And with that, I will turn it over to Bethany.
Great. Thank you so much, Kristine, for that introduction. And to the Interreach leadership for the opportunity to serve the community by learning alongside you today. The work that I'm presenting today is really just little hatchling thoughts of a long incubation period, as indicated by my bio. I intended to make this topic of sense-making tools the subject of my dissertation, but as we all know, often dissertations get scoped downward in order to finish them. So I focused there just on the sort of cross-disciplinary reasoning part of sense-making tools. So now this is my first opportunity to really start synthesizing the literature and the practice and the experience that I have and I've been hearing from colleagues like you in how we use tools to span boundaries, whether those are across disciplines, across sectors, across cultures, and so on. So without further ado, I'll jump in to the presentation. The idea here today is to give a little bit of a background in general principles of tools and tool use as food for thought. Am I displaying my main title slide correctly?
Bethany, it's your presenter tools.
Thank you. I will swap those displays. How's this? Okay, we got it. And then we'll open it up for some more discussion. I have seen on the call already some names that I recognize who are experts in their own right in various kinds of boundary spanning tools. And I would love to hear from you as experts in practice and theory. So we're here to kick off a whole spring webinar series on boundary spanning tools for research teams. And we'll start with some of those general principles, and then we'll close the presentation by previewing the series of who is going to be presenting what. To start off with, I just want to share my personal vision and understanding of what boundary spanning is. This is a little excerpt of a visual manifesto that I created with the help of one of my mentees, actually. She, in that case, gave more back to me than I did to her in helping me understand what drives me and what are my passions in my profession and my personal life. This is my interpretation of the Norse mythology of the Bifrost or the Bifrost, which is the rainbow bridge that connects the 9 realms in Norse mythology. I first learned about this, as you know, many uneducated Americans do, from the Marvel Comics series, where Thor explains that the phenomena, the mysterious connections that the scientist Jane had been seeing are indeed real. She is not crazy. She has been noticing something that other people have been missing, because she is looking for the connections between the things that most people like to look at. Most people like to study realms and worlds themselves and planets. They're very interesting, obviously, but Jane was noticing the space between the planets and what connected them. This fits very well with Kristine Hendren's wonderful analogy of being the arrow in Interreach and our various professions there. But we know that spanning boundaries is hard, and tools can make it easier. You know, if we were to stretch that analogy of the Bifrost, it took lots of tools and lots of expertise to build those bridges that made world traveling possible. So here today, we're starting to explore together as a community what it means to use boundary spanning tools well. For those of you who were able to, I hope you could download the accompanying worksheets, or what I'm calling the DIY field notebook that accompanies this webinar. This is something that I've dreamed about creating for a while, based on an exercise that I first did as a high school ecology student. And I have the original example right here. This is my California field notebook, which literally traveled with me into the field for many, many field trips, and it's stained with rain and mud, and has all of my handwritten notes along with some supplied information from our instructor. So it was a collaborative co-learning effort that I learned probably the most from of any of my courses in my life, because I helped to complete it. Right. This is my interpretation of what I was learning in theory and in the field. I learned so much from this practice that I created my own when I moved to Maine, and I redid it. And now that I'm working in the field of cross-disciplinarity itself, I wondered if we could create something similar. So it's a trial run. It's version 1.0. There's lots of room for improvement. Please let me know if you have suggestions on that. Again, you can fill it out on your computer. You can print it, you know, and put it in your own 3-ring binder, so you can put in other handouts and collections along the way. Let's start with the most basic question we're probably all wondering, or we have asked at some point in our lives: what is a tool? I am a philosopher by training, and I could get deep into the weeds with what is a tool philosophically. And I will draw on some of that here to inform the conversation. But really, we need to tackle this question because in the discourse and the practice of boundary spanning, people talk about tools all the time, but they use the word in different ways. So I just want to clarify what are some of the ways the word gets used in general, but the way we're going to use the word tool in this series. So to start to wrap our heads around it, we need to understand this idea of extension. And what I mean there is how we extend our efforts into the world through objects like tools. So basic model, right? You've got a bunch of tool users. Maybe it's you or another individual. Maybe it's a group of people. And then you have some kind of object in the environment. Sometimes it might be something more tangible, maybe a model that we're working with, a physical or an algorithmic model. But sometimes the object could be intangible, something like group trust or shared understanding. A tool is something that enables the users to extend their energy towards that object to interact with that object. So it's a form of interaction where you are using your energy and entering, kind of like a hand fits into a glove, to interact with some kind of object in the real world. And it's this kind of soft coupling that happens when we join with a tool to get something done. This is the idea of extension. So we could think about a tool in general as something that extends our abilities into the larger environment. In that broader sense, people use the term tool to talk about technologies or sort of tools writ large. Together, they're sort of referring to how-to resources. If you're a fan, as I am, of the I2S blog run by Gabrielle Bammer, she tends to use the word tools in this sense, because everything posted on that blog is coming at various levels of abstractness, from frameworks and principles all the way down to very concrete things like specific platforms or tools. And what I'm focusing on here in this series is more towards the concrete side of the spectrum. I found that a lot of us, especially since we often have advanced academic training, or at least have like received some kind of, post-baccalaureate, like continuing education, we get the abstract stuff pretty well. We have more resources out there in the world for training us in the frameworks and the principles of boundary spanning than how to actually implement those with concrete tools. And of course, you need to know those frameworks and those principles, and being cognitively flexible with those kinds of how-to resources is absolutely a foundation for you to be able to choose the correct, the most suitable tool for every situation. But I found that like making that jump of how do I apply my abstract theoretical understanding of boundary spanning into something very concrete is just a little gap that we've been missing in our training as boundary spanners. So that's kind of the gap we're hoping to address with this series. I don't have a really strong definition yet of how I might sort of define tools in this particular concrete sense, but it's something that extends our abilities with or because of its unique socio-material shape. Okay, so there's an aspect of particularity and concreteness to a tool. So examples, okay. Google Docs is a platform that can be used for a variety of tools. And an example of one of those tools might be a 2x2 matrix, like the priority importance matrix, or the Amazon Web Services, platform might be used for many different kinds of tools, such as Breezio or Highlighter or other kinds of more complex boundary spanning tools. Zoom itself is a platform, right, that can be used with many different particular tools. So that's where we're going with that. I want to be able to distinguish pretty clearly between these two different ways of talking about tools. Are there any comments or questions really quickly before we go any further? You can unmute or show in the chat, and maybe Kristine could help with the chat. Okay, not seeing any, Kristine. Oh, okay.
I have no questions in the chat yet. Yeah.
So jumping into then how do we start using these really concrete tools? That's our focus here. You can think about it in terms of a really basic learning cycle. First, use a suitable tool. This is the goal. We don't want to use tools that don't fit the situation. We want to use suitable tools, and we'll talk about exactly what that means later on. We want to learn from every attempt, just like you would if you're trying to learn how to use a new tool in your wood shop. You're learning from every attempt so that you can get better at it and learn how to pick particular kinds or elements or uses for that tool. We want to remember to celebrate our successes. I could have left that out, but I need to put that in there because so many times we forget to celebrate. We can't to focus on our problems. We want to celebrate our successes, focus on what was doing well and try to replicate that. And then rinse and repeat, basic learning cycle. 5 principles of tool suitability. My little avatar there says this is really important, and it is. This is at least where I see a lot of the important work hinging in between connecting theory with practice in implementing those more abstract theories and frameworks of boundary spanning. Just a little note that these 5 principles are still, in my mind, developing, and they're together a synthesis of many theorists and practitioners that I've interacted with, but they are just one way of looking at the topic, and this hopefully could be a topic of discussion later today. Let's start with the principle number 1 of systems. So I've come to learn and like the framework of cultural historical activity theory as one way of thinking about the various components that are interacting whenever users, use a tool in order to impact an object to have some kind of outcome. And I hope, and I'm sure there are some people here on the call today who are more experts in cultural historical activity theory or chat, and would love to hear your thoughts on this and how it fits. But according to Engstrom, who really took this from Vygotsky and Leontiev and expanded it in his 1987 and 2015 works, argues that there's these main 6 components to a chat system. First, you've got your tool right there at the top. That's where we're focusing. But of course, it's only useful when in practice by users to impact or interact with some kind of object. The goal of this, of course, is to interact some change in the world, you have some outcome. Below all of that are these more visible and less visible infrastructures, institutional arrangements. You have your larger community that the users are embedded in. Maybe it's their particular research center or the university or a national lab. You can, of course, expand that outwards to the world or the universe. There are hidden or not so hidden rules or norms for how that community works. Specifically, when it comes to rules for interacting with certain objects in the system, there is a delegation of labor. I just started a new position as assistant dean with the graduate school at MSU, and I am operating a lot with the new development of new delegation of labor in my role. My role is completely new, right? So we're deciding, like, Bethany's going to interact with objects X, Y, and Z, but the other associate teams are going to do A, B, and C. Those are important things to keep track of that are informing that sort of microsystem of the immediate situation where the user is the tool and the objects are interacting to have an outcome.
Bethany, sorry to interrupt you. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. One is from Jeff Agnoli, and with regard to your question about understanding tools and the distinction between the abstract and the concrete. You mentioned a blog, and Jeff was just wondering if it was the A2RU or something else.
That's great. The A2RU blog is very helpful. And focuses more on the integration of arts into the research university, but I was specifically talking about the I2 Insights blog, i2insights.org.
Oh, great. And then Melanie Chase is asking if this is referring to organizational culture systems, this slide that you're showing right now.
Oh, thanks, Melanie. I am not familiar with a particular framework around organizational cultural systems. If there is one, I would love to learn about it. But yes, I think you could map this into or interpret this as an organizational cultural system. Would love to hear more about those thoughts during the extended Q&A.
Thanks.
Okay. As good systems thinkers, we know that whenever you're focused on one system, you're never just looking at one system. It's embedded within lots of other systems. At the very least, one way to think about your focal system is that each of those 6 components is generated by another system that is focused on, for instance, the rules as the object that is being created. That's like maybe your policy system or your cultural norm system. And you could think about at least these 6 adjacent systems that are interacting with your one focal system. I heard a nice heuristic, I think works well in practice and probably beyond, that when you're doing systems thinking work, it's really helpful to first identify what's your focus, what level of system you're focusing on, and then keep an eye on the systems at one level above and one level below that nested system of systems. So that's something that we want to be aware of as people who are practicing tools in larger systemic context. So let's zero in on the tools component of the chat system. I'm pulling from Aristotle here, who has, I think, a really helpful way of thinking about how to explain something. He proposes that there's 4 ways or 4 causes to explaining an object or something in the world. So he's a causal pluralist. He says there's no single one explanation to rule them all. You have at least these 4 that are co-equal. So if you think about a hammer as an example of a tool, it's got a shape, or what Aristotle would call a form. It has animating energy, right? You could ask, well, why is the hammer swinging? Because I am putting energy into swinging it. The hammer has materials, in this case, metal and wood, and the hammer has a purpose for which it was created, or multiple purposes for which it was created, or even unintentional or hacked purposes that you can use the hammer for, even though it wasn't created for that. So here's an example, right, of a hammer. And actually, I'd love to take a minute now to brainstorm with you. Use your imagination here and imagine, instead of a hammer, you're thinking of one of your favorite boundary spanning tools. If you need an idea of a tool, maybe think of that 2x2 priority versus effort matrix. And think of, when you think about all the tools you have in your boundary spanning toolbox, what are some of the shapes that they take? So for example, the priority effort matrix has a matrix shape, particularly a 2x2 matrix shape. The energy would be, me and maybe a group that are writing down our ideas. The material for that 2x2 matrix could be digital, or it could be chalk on a chalkboard, or it could be markers on a flip chart. There are definitely ways that the same tool could vary in its material, and it has purpose. The main purpose for which that 2x2 matrix was invented was to help prioritize, right? So your effort versus return. There's various ways that you can get that 2x2 matrix set up. But, you can identify like low-hanging fruit that has low effort but high return, and other things that have high effort and low return that you want to avoid. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of interaction now, and also a bit of learning about a specific tool that's available in the Zoom platform. So if all of you can looking at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a button there that says annotate. Can I see any thumbs up or nods on that? Maybe I need to turn this on. No?
Bethany, I personally see it at the top where it says
Oh, okay.
You're viewing Bethany Laursen's screen, and then it says view options, and there's a drop down menu, and within that there's an annotate selection.
Excellent. Yes, and someone has tried the annotate function. So go ahead and scribble on the screen. You can use the text annotate function or just the little scribble, and jot down some of your own ideas about what are the various shapes or forms of energy or materials that boundary spanning tools are made out of. I love how people are exploring. Is the cat is the cat a purpose of one of these tools? I would love to see that. If you would, you can practice using your annotate tools here and then clear them by clearing all of my drawings, and that would help add in. Good. Motivator reframing are two possible purposes. I can't see my mouse, so I could help out, but I somehow lost my mouse in taking that out there.
Bethany, I'm just going to elevate a request from Ashley to repeat the question.
Sure. I would like you to brainstorm for each of those 4 items. What are some possible specifics for your boundary spanning tools? So another example, I gave you an example, like a possible shape for our boundary spanning tool would be a matrix. Another shape could be a tree, like a decision-making tree. Another one could be a story where you write out a narrative that helps you understand the situation. Material templates, great. Templates can come in digital or physical forms. Great, so here's a good example of the shared language or typology. I would argue that's more of a shape, because the shared language or typology could come in varieties of materials. You could think about it as a digital spreadsheet or like a paper dictionary. So we're getting really literal here when we're talking about the materials, because the materials matter. We have all come to experience this during the Zoom age, where maybe a lot of us used to rely upon the physical materials of flip charts and markers that we can no longer use. We're talking about digital materials a lot more, and those have different affordances, which is our next topic. We'll give people a couple more seconds to finish their brainstorming, but I want to open it up for questions or to clarify this here. I think this concept of 4 different features is going to become clearer as we work with it, but are there any questions right now?
None from the chat, Bethany, quite yet.
Okay, well, we'll address them as they come in. Great. So I'm going to move on, and I wonder what happens to the annotations. Let's see here. Okay. So now I think I might be able to clear. But before that, I'm going to take a screenshot because it's really helpful to document brainstorming, right? Whenever we do that. Thanks for your thoughts, everyone. I should be able to clear this now. Oops.
Bethany, when you get a chance, we have a question from Joanne.
Let's go, Joanne. What's your question?
Joanne, do you wanna unmute it?
I just put it in the chat. So I just wanted to know if, so you were very kind enough to define tools for us, but I just wondered if we all had a common understanding of what you mean by boundary spanning.
Thanks. Yeah. Probably not, because boundary spanning is probably itself a boundary concept that has enough definition that we all agree we should be in this webinar together, but probably some fairly stretchy specific interpretations. My background is in network analysis, so I like to think about boundary spanning in terms of networks. And I also study integration with the toolbox dialogue folks, and integration is also a form of boundary spanning. And we think about that in terms of the possible integrated relations. So again, I'm thinking about the possible different relations that one could build across the boundary of two different groups or topics or institutional arrangements or organizations. So if I've got a boundary that defines and distinguishes X from Y, maybe it's Michigan State University from the University of Michigan. There are lots of ways to span or bridge those boundaries between those two organizations. I could collaborate, I could integrate, I could coordinate, I could even treat them more abstractly and like use some kind of metaphor to bridge them, or maybe I could subsume both of those under a larger category of state schools in Michigan. So I think of boundary spanning in terms of all of the possible relationships that could be built between two different things. Other topics or ways to amplify that? I know there's a lot of people on the call who have thought about it a lot. Okay, we'll move on.
Sorry,
oh,
there's actually one more point or one more question, and then Melanie has put in the chat that she says, in my work, boundary spanning is about change management and building awareness, understanding alignment to mobilize action. We have specific group processes, process tools, processes, methods for that. Again, fascinating lens across disciplines here. Thanks.
Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah, a couple more questions came through. Colin asked if you can distinguish a tool from an artifact.
Yeah, no, I don't think I could. Although maybe I would say, again, I think it depends on sort of which disciplinary background you're coming from, or your cultural background. In cultural historical activity theory, any of those how-to resources would count as an artifact because they're human created objects, even if they're intangible, like a framework. But if you talk to archaeologists or anthropologists, they might focus more on a material object as an artifact. So I think, again, that depends on where you're coming from. And in this series, I think I'm just staying away from that, but you could think, again, I think about artifacts as either at that general level of everything that's human created, or something really specific like a socio-material or technological tool.
Excellent. One other question, what are the forces driving boundary spanning?
I think we should all read Julie ThompsonKlein's new book on boundary spanning and crossing boundaries. It's not out yet, unfortunately, so we might have to settle for some of her previous work, especially her 1996 book on crossing boundaries. But lots of things drive boundary spanning, and I think that's a conversation that we've been having here in Interreach and in related communities for a long time. Just to name a few, right? There's economic drivers to capitalize upon, market niches, or there's curiosity is what drives me to span boundaries. The general human drive to connect things and people and concepts into coherent wholes is a huge driver of boundary spanning. So I think we could think about that at lots of different levels, and we can continue that conversation later.
Great, thank you very much. And there's just a wonderful chat going on, so I'm excited for all of this to come out in the discussion.
So we'll just wrap up here with two more general principles of tool suitability. This is principle number 4, is the idea of affordances, and it comes from John James Gibson, who started his work as a cognitive psychologist, usually mainly in visual perception. Back in 1979, he proposed that when humans look at objects in the world, they can automatically perceive what that object could be used to do. Now, the idea of affordances has been then adopted from Gibson and stretched and used, and is now a central concept in the design disciplines, especially human and computer interaction, who I see as our close allies in this work of boundary spanning tools, especially since a lot of it is now over the computer, where they're thinking about affordances in the terms of what can the tool do, but also what is obvious to the user, a usability kind of what could the tool do. So you could think again of that hammer. Me just looking at the hammer, I could immediately tell it's going to be good for prying, it's going to be good for hitting, I could prop something up with it. And of course, there are other uses for a hammer, bad or good, and affordances that were designed into the tool, but also affordances that the user can invent, so long as the shape and material of the tool, are make that affordance possible. So this idea of affordances is going to be really key in helping us choose which tool is going to work for us here, because it's like, what could the tool do? And we may be able to use it for its designed affordances, or we may be able to create and hack an affordance in our particular situation. The last topic that I want to, or principle I want to share, is a really synthetic idea that I'm still playing with and would love some feedback on it. But it's more about how do you know when you've got a tool that's fit for the situation? Well, when we think about whether or not I have like a keyboard that's suitable for me, we talk about whether or not the keyboard is ergonomically fit for me, right? We like to talk about ergonomics in our physical space, especially since we're all working from home. We've probably been thinking about ergonomics a lot. Cognitive psychologists, people who study knowledge work especially, have then expanded ergonomics to think about cognitive ergonomics. Like, what kind of a tool is cognitively, ergonomically fit for like your thinking style, for instance. So I use Evernote as my tool for capturing notes. It's a giant big bucket that has a big search function because that fits my cognitive style. So cognitive ergonomics is getting a good fit of the tool with your way of thinking and with the cognitive task. Others have taken that idea beyond. So the focus of ergonomics is making sure that you're not in pain when you're using the tool. That's been the historical focus of it. Others, especially in the field of human-computer interaction, have then focused on, and I think Apple led the way a lot in thinking about not ergonomics, but hedonomics, which is not the lack of pain, but the presence of pleasure or fun, having a pleasant experience when you're using the tool. So I'd like to talk about hedonomics. And I want to take that today one step further to say, it's not enough when you're choosing a tool, especially when you're doing boundary spanning that's tied up with these larger socio-environmental problems. It's not enough to just have fun using the tool. I think we need to be aiming higher than that for the greater good and the greater well-being. So again, stealing from Aristotle, I would like to call it something like eudonomics, pulling from the Greek word Aristotle uses to describe the good life. Flourishing, well-being is eudaimonia. So I want us to consider an ethical mandate to go beyond just having fun using our tools, to go beyond just not hating using our tools, but to reaching for the good life in our local teams and in the broader systems that our teams are operating in. So maybe you could think about the triangulation of those 6 factors in the chat system as some kind of, instead of an ergonomic fit, maybe some kind of eudonomic fit. Happy to be told other terms, because I think this term is like super unwieldy, but maybe ergonomics was unwieldy when we started using it too. So in summary, if you're following along in your field notebook, here are some of the sentences you might fill in, and I'm happy to share these slides with Interreach later. So I'll just pause on this slide for a teensy bit. I have just 2 more slides to share what we're going to cover in the series, and then we're going to be done. So what are we going to cover? There's lots of ways, obviously, to sort of break down and cover the realm of what tools are and what they can do. I tried to get very practical, being a practitioner as well as theorist. I make my first cut in deciding which tool I'm going to use by first looking at the purpose. What am I trying to accomplish, right? Like, what is the outcome? So we're breaking up the series into 4 total, 3 more sessions, where each session centers a single boundary spanning task or tool purpose. And then my next consideration as a practitioner is I need something simple or I need something complex. And often that's like, I don't have time, to work with something more complex, or, my team doesn't have the patience to work with something more complex. And so I choose between something really simple or something more complex. So every session, we're going to be presenting a simpler tool and a more complex tool. And so this is what the lineup looks like so far. You can review that on the Interreach events page. But I just want to note that we're still looking for 1 more presenter for the last session, reflexivity and readiness. That is in May. Oh, I'm sorry, there's 4 more sessions. We luckily have an expert in cross-disciplinary integration, Antonietta De Guilio, who's going to be presenting a more complex tool that day, but still looking for 1 more presenter. If you'd like to get in on the action, please contact me. So again, please visit the Interreach Webinar Series events page for the full lineup, and to make sure that you are subscribed to the listserv, to invite others to subscribe to the listserv so you get the Zoom notifications. All right, so with that, we're going to talk. We've already been talking along the way, and I'd love to open it up and ask Kristine to help us moderate our discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Bethany. This is really, really wonderful, and I so appreciate your abstract framework to think about these concrete tools. It's very, very helpful for me personally, and it seems like for a lot of folks on the call as well. So let's definitely open it up to any questions. I think I am caught up on questions from the chat. So if anyone has any questions, I see that Michael Hoffman has his hand raised. Michael, do you want to unmute?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, Bethany, for your talk. That was very interesting. I am really interested in the last concept that you introduced, eudainomics. I mean, first of all, I really think it's an excellent idea to go beyond hedonize, so the pleasure idea, and looking at something broader, as Aristotle indicated with his concept of eudaimonia. What I'm kind of concerned about is the second half of the concept, namely the nomics part, because if you're talking about eudainomics, then the expectation is that it should be possible to formulate some rules or norms that could be used to assess whether you achieved this kind of eudaimonia. And the question is whether that's possible at all. That's kind of my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a really insightful. Michael and I was going to mention that, and I started to take it out. And I'm really glad as a fellow philosopher that you noticed that and brought that up. The nomics part, or just even the idea of, can you articulate general principles for what well-being looks like, has long been debated in virtue ethics since Aristotle first articulated it. He's super squirrely in his ethics about what the good life is. He'll tell you something like, well, the wise person will tell you, or the wise person will demonstrate by their life what the good life is. So he evades the question, kind of like a politician. I don't know where I land yet on that, Michael. I feel like, and I believe a lot of others would say, yeah, I can look at a situation and say, you are not thriving. I can tell. And maybe I could describe some particular things that I'm observing. I don't know, though, if I could translate that particularism into some kind of general principle. What do you think, Michael? You've probably thought about some of this.
Yeah, thanks for asking back. No, but I think, I mean, what you're kind of indicating in your last words is more, instead of talking about the rules or principles, it's talking about the method, how to identify those. So, and that I think is really a good idea. So, yeah, you can tell if something fits, and then you might develop some language to describe what exactly it is that makes it fitting. So it's kind of a bottom-up methodology where you start from observing this sort of fitting, and then you try to develop terminology to get the criteria straight. So I think the method is good. Otherwise, I don't have any concrete ideas about this question, but I think it's important.
It really is, yeah. Other ideas or thoughts on that question from Michael?
There's some comments from folks in the chat. Actually, Ashley shared an article from Harvard Business Review about eudonomics.
No way.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So she shared the link. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much, Ashley. Melanie, would you like to unmute and share your comments? Or Mira as well?
Sure, I'm here, Melanie Chase. I shut off my video, so my comment, so the good life for academic researchers can be defined, and I'm just elaborating that as far as work in research teams and boundary setting, and what it means to come together to collaborate on a research team can be defined. That's what we're working towards in research teams. So this, it's all very fascinating. I appreciate it. It's a little more abstract, and I'm just wrapping my mind around, what are the practical applications here of what you're discussing with this eudonomics and other philosophical concepts. So I guess I have more questions than answers right now. I don't know. I would ask others, are there some specific practices that you use to clarify what is the good life for us as we work together? What are we working towards? These are much more concrete and direct questions. I would hope to get at how we solve problems together in teams.
Thanks, Melanie. Yeah, I think it's a great point. We can maybe define the good life for researchers and academics, and also does it go beyond that in terms of defining the good life for all, for flourishing and well-being, for the collective good.
Yeah, and so is this about meaning making? I mean, this is a fascinating place to start around this concept. And I guess it is, you know, it's a richer personal meaning making and group meaning making discussion. Is that why it's top of mind for you, Bethany?
Yeah,
that you brought it up?
A couple of reasons. So one is maybe it's just a personal style, or maybe it's more human style. I like to start any effort by thinking about why I'm doing it. Like, what's the end goal here?
Yeah.
And so the larger end purpose, and of course, like everything we do is part of this continuum of action in the larger universe, and you have to cut that off somewhere, right? But we also ought to be thinking about how our ripple effects are going beyond where we can even think. But I think about that, you know, within my horizon of responsibility, what does a good life look like, and how am I working towards achieving that when I work with this group or with myself as I start an interdisciplinary research project, and that so it's a top of mind because it's the starting place for where I think of planning. It's also top of mind because it's the next step. When I, for instance, work with the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative and decide what kind of tool we might use to develop some shared community norms, I am thinking sort of what's going to be the immediate impact on the team's well-being of using a collaboration plan template and a particular process for filling it out. Because I can tell you, we've tried other tools in the Toolbox Dialogue Initiative for developing communal norms that haven't resulted in team well-being because of people's personalities or cognitive styles or just absenteeism, or, you know, people are busy. But because of, and those factors around the triangle, right? Like because of the rules, because of the community, because of the delegation of tasks, like this particular tool was not a good well-being fit for our team at that time. But instead, you know, maybe we can try this other tool called the collaboration plan that we can use to develop community norms, and we'll, you know, get even more specific about how we're going to use that collaboration plan. You know, we're going to use Google Docs so that people can work on it asynchronously, and we're going to have a particular set of rules for how we divide up the work. And that particular tool has been resulting in better team well-being overall, where we are moving towards shared norms and clearer group practices. So I keep it in mind because it guides me and is the end goal, but also the means by which I'm reaching that end goal. I'm working for well-being along every step of the way.
Well, I would just add here in the world I'm in, we consider experiential objectives. So that is part of your well-being experience as a team member, how you're feeling, and whether you're continually motivated to contribute as part of a team. Experiential objectives. And then rational objectives are, what are we solving together? What is the task at hand to solve this particular interdisciplinary problem? So the language is just, you know, it's just fascinating. And I think that it just calls to me to help unpack those language differences. Oh, you mean this term in my world of, you know, whatever the discipline is that I would ascribe to being affiliated with, but that, you know, makes it more a universal concept here. And I appreciate it. I love the image too with the horses. I'd like to go there now. That sounds great.
Right. Thriving, very thriving.
And I'm going to just add another thing that I think it's really important to make it safe for people to be very transparent and intentional about what does it mean for me to be flourishing on a team.
Yes.
You know, that's so many times it's the subtext that undermines teams that's never spoken about.
That's right. Yep. And it's not just my flourishing, the flourishing of my CV, right? It's the flourishing of me as a person, which also includes the flourishing of my relationship with you and with people who are not on this team, who are affected by my involvement in this team. And as a community sustainability scholar and coming out of the environmental field, that's how I think about what is sustainability, is mutual human environmental flourishing. And I think, by the way, we don't talk enough about environmental flourishing in team science.
No, and you mean the cultural context. If that's how what I hear when you talk about the environment.
I mean that, but I do also mean like the physical ecology. Mm-hmm. Kristine, I want to make sure we get to others' comments and questions.
There's quite a bit of chat going on, and I have been like trying to respond to stuff, but I guess I want to say that there is a lot of chat going on. You have created quite a conversation, and it makes me think that this might be a really good opportunity for us to continue a discussion along this thread in the Interreach Journal Club Reading Club. And so I am gonna pop that link for, Kristine Hendren is on top of it. She just popped in the link for suggestions. If anyone has any suggestions for an article that we can all read together, we meet on the 4th Tuesday of every month to have news discussions. So, and that would be really great. If we have maybe another minute, it looks like,
I think more.
Yeah, there's someone's hand is up at Coggle. Is that how you say your name?
Oh, we can't hear you. Why? Not yet.
Unfortunately, yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the sound there. If you want to put a question in the chat, I also realize it's 1 o'clock, and want to be mindful of everyone's time. Bethany, I don't know if you have a moment to stay on.
I do have time to stay on.
Okay. Yeah. To those that have to run, thank you so much for being here and for contributing to this conversation. And we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks from today. If you'd like to join us for the Journal Club, we'll take a look at the suggestions, and we'll propose something via email to the group. Thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Bethany, for putting all of this together.
We'll see you next month.
Sounds good.
But yes, I'm happy to stay on and talk.
Sounds good.